Like I talked about in my analogies video, we are storytellers. All of us use stories as part of the way that we convince people and interact with people through our daily lives. Storytelling well can make people more likely to do what you want, can rally a team, can make people enthusiastic. It's very important to be able to tell a story regardless of what you do day to day. For me, there are three ways to go about storytelling. Three different strategies that I've seen used to be an effective storyteller. Each comes with different benefits and different disadvantages, but they work with different personality types. Those three types of storytellers are: 1, the storyteller; 2, the story crafter; and 3, the story shaper. And that third one, the story shaper, is one that I've only really considered for really the last few months as a different categorization. So let me go into those three in detail and talk about what they are, how they work, their advantages and disadvantages, and what to do if you feel that you are in one of these categories and you're needing the skill set of another one. Obviously, these things are not absolutes. No one is a pure storyteller or a pure story crafter or a pure story shaper. All of these things exist on a continuum. But as I speak, as I talk and describe these, I suspect you're going to feel yourself fitting into one of these categories more than the others. So the first one is storytellers. These are people who are very good at the actual act of telling a story. They're very agile and compelling. When they're speaking, people listen and they hang on their every words. They're often inspiring, they have a strong tone of voice, and their actual style of presenting is natural, comfortable, and they're able to just hold a room seemingly effortlessly. This effortlessness means that sometimes they don't really have a story behind the story that they are telling. They're just flowing and telling the story as it comes to mind. These kinds of people can draw an audience, but then if you've ever had someone tell you a story, try to convince you, and being convinced in the room, but then after the fact felt that story start to unravel or fall apart, this could be because they were a storyteller. Sometimes, if they're not careful, storytellers can end up not having anything behind that story. They're just bringing the room along with their storytelling without there being substance behind the scenes. Almost diametrically opposed is the story crafter. Story crafters build a careful story that is researched. They have beautiful PowerPoint presentations. They have data. These people convince through force of presentation. They may not be as compelling in the room itself, but they're very effective in cases where the communication style of an organization is offline. They build excellent decks that can carry an audience along. However, because of that large amount of preparation, sometimes the story they have crafted is very rigid. It can be difficult for them to adapt because there's a lot of thinking and energy put into that story. This can cause them to seem stubborn or out of touch with the audience they're presenting to. The final type of storyteller, and the one that is sort of newest to my thinking, is the story shaper. This might sound at first like something in between the crafter and the teller, but I think it's something different. This is someone who adjusts and interacts with their audience in order to craft the story with them. This means that they are able to build a story that is compelling to their audience and make the audience feel like they're involved in the crafting of the storytelling. Now, the disadvantage of this is that this can be a habit that can result in you adjusting your storytelling even when you shouldn't, making changes to the way that you're shaping the story in order to make the audience come on side, even when you're crossing a line that you shouldn't otherwise have crossed. I've worked with people who are excellent and successful with all three styles of storytelling. Personally, I would put myself as maybe a C+ storyteller, maybe a B- story crafter, but the thing I really excel at is that story shaping. I love working with my audience to build the story that is compelling to them and shaping it alongside of them. It's amusing that I find myself being a YouTube personality because the interaction cadence on this storytelling is actually really weak, so it's difficult for me to interact with and adjust to you as an audience in order for us to craft a story together that is highly compelling. So what do you do to deal with or combat the different weaknesses or strengths that each of these storytellers have? If you are a pure storyteller, the thing to make sure of is that you have something to back up what you're saying. Don't just spin a yarn on the day of the presentation. Even though you might get the audience on board in the moment, they have a good chance of dismissing what you said after the fact. So make sure there is supporting materials in order to back you up. This can be an opportunity for you to use your storytelling powers. If you have a story crafter on your team, work with them to build that supporting material. They can provide that data to back you up. You tell them that story beforehand and build it into something that can stand up to scrutiny. I've seen story crafters, on the other hand, present incredibly effectively simply through the sheer act of preparation. You build an excellent deck, you build an excellent talk track, and you just practice. To combat that rigidity, however, it's good to have someone else there with you in order to be able to hear the audience, hear the places where they're departing from your storytelling, and be able to listen and adapt to that. The thing to remember is that rigidity that you have a tendency to have. If possible, find out as clearly as possible the story that your audience is going to want to hear, so that you don't over-attach to the storytelling that you're crafting and can instead craft something that matches your audience. That's a way to avoid or sidestep that rigidity because you're building to the audience itself. For people like me, people who are story shapers, you have to find a way to build a deck up front. Usually you can get something down and then find someone to iterate with. It doesn't have to be your final audience. In fact, it usually shouldn't be your final audience. Iterate with and form the presentation over time because this is where you're strongest. Also, be aware of, identify the lines you're unwilling to cross. Because if you don't, as I said before, this can get you into trouble when you just naturally feel yourself adapting to the audience and telling them what they want to hear. Hopefully this helps you understand the kind of storyteller you are and ways that you can take advantage of your own strengths and to combat your own weaknesses. Obviously, the ideal situation would be the case where you have a deck and presentation built by a story crafter, presented by a storyteller, backed up by a story shaper. But to do this and to do it effectively requires that each of those three people be willing to listen to the other two and to be able to step aside when they're falling into their own weaknesses. If you can do it, it's incredibly powerful. But even if you can't, you can be aware of your own blind spots and avoid them by focusing on your strengths. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and I'll see you again soon.